Chapter 4. The Market as a Social Institution. We usually think of markets as places where things are bought and sold. In this common everyday usage, the word market may refer to particular markets that we may know of, such as the market next to the railway station, the fruit market, or the wholesale market. Sometimes we refer not to the physical place but to gathering of people, buyers and sellers who constitute the market. Thus, for example, a weekly vegetable market may be found in different places on different days of the week in neighboring villages or urban neighborhoods. In yet another sense, market refers to an area or category of trade or business, such as the market for cars or the market for ready made clothes. A related sense refers to the demand for a particular product or service, such as the market for computer professionals. What all of these meanings have in common is that they refer to a specific market. Those meaning is readily understandable from the context. But what does it mean to speak of the market in a general way without referring to any particular place, gathering of people, or field of commercial activity? This usage includes not only of the specific senses mentioned above, but also entire spectrum of economic activities and institutions. In this very broad sense, then the market is almost equivalent to the economy. We are used to thinking of the market as an economic institution, but this chapter will show you that the market is also a social institution in its own way. The market is comparable to more obviously social institutions like caste, tribe, or family. Sociological perspectives on markets and economy. The discipline of economics is aimed at understanding and explaining how markets work. In modern capitalist economies, for instance, how prices are determined, the probable impact of specific kinds of investment, or the factors that influence people to save or spend. What does sociology have to contribute to the study of markets that goes beyond what economics can tell us? To answer this question, we need to go back briefly to 18th century England and the beginnings of modern economics, which at that time was called political economy. The most famous of early political economists was Adam Smith, who in his book The Wealth of Nations attempted to understand the market economy that was just emerging at that time. Smith argued that the market economy is made up of a series of individual exchanges or transactions which automatically create a functioning and ordered system. This happens even though none of the individuals involved in the millions of transactions had intended to create a system. Each person looks only to their own self interest, but in the pursuit of this self interest, the interest of all or of society also seemed to be looked after. In this sense, there seems to be sort of unseen force at work that converts what is good for each individual into what is good for society. This unseen force was called the invisible hand by Adam Smith. Thus, Smith argued that the capitalist economy is driven by individual self interest and works best when individual buyers and sellers make rational decisions that serve their own interest. Smith used the idea of invisible hand to argue that society overall benefits when individuals pursue their own self interest in the market because it stimulates the economy and creates more wealth. For this reason, Smith supported the idea of a free market, that is, a market free from all kinds of regulation, whether by state or otherwise. Economic philosophy was also given the name laissez faire, a French phrase that means leave alone or let it be. Modern economics developed from ideas of early thinkers such as Adam Smith and is based on the idea that the economy can be studied as a separate part of the society that operates according to its own laws, leaving out the larger social or political context in which markets operate. In contrast to this approach, sociologists have attempted to develop an alternative way of studying economic institutions, and processes within the larger social framework. Sociologists view markets as social institutions that are constructed in culturally specific ways. For example, markets are often controlled or organized by particular social groups or classes and have specific connections to other institutions, social processes, and structures. Sociologists often express the idea by saying that economic are socially embedded. This is related by two examples, one of a weekly tribal hut and other of a traditional business community and its trading networks in colonial India. A weekly tribal market in Thorai village, Bastar, Chhattisgarh. In most agrarian or peasant societies around the world, periodic markets are a central feature of social and economic organization. Weekly markets bring together people from surrounding villages who come to sell their agriculture or other produce and to buy manufactured goods and other items that are not available in their villages. They attract traders from outside the local area as well as money lenders, entertainers, astrologers, and a host of other specialists offering their services and wares. In rural India, there are also specialized markets that takes place at less frequent intervals. For instance, cattle markets. These periodic markets link different regional and local communities together and link them to wider national economy and to towns and multiple metropolitan centers. The weekly hut is a common sight in rural and even urban India. In hilly and forested areas where settlements are far flung, roads and communications poor, and the economy relatively undeveloped, the weekly market is a major institution for the exchange of goods as well as for social intercourse. Local people come to the market to sell their agricultural or forest produce to traders who carry it to towns for resale, and they buy essentials such as salt and agricultural implements and consumption items such as bangles and jewelry. But for many visitors, the primary reason to come to the market is social, to meet kin, to arrange marriages, exchange gossip, and so on. While the weekly market in tribal areas may be a very old institution, its character has changed over time. After these remote areas were brought under the control of colonial state, they were gradually incorporated into wider regional and national economies. Tribal areas were opened up by building roads and pacifying the local people so that rich forest and mineral resources of these areas could be exploited. This led to the influx of traders, money lenders, and other non tribal people from the plains into these areas. The local tribal economy was transformed as forest produce was sold to outsiders, and money and new kinds of goods entered the system. Tribals were also recruited as laborers to work on plantation and mines that were established under colonialism. A market for tribal labor developed during the colonial period. Due to all these changes, local tribal economies became linked to wider markets, usually with very negative consequences for local people. For example, the entry of traders and money lenders from outside the local area led to the impoverishment of Adivasis, many of whom lost their land to outsiders. The weekly market as a social constitution, the links between the local tribal economy and the outside, and the exploitative economic relationship between Adivasis and others are illustrated by a study of weekly market in Bastar. The district is populated mainly by Gonds and Adivasi group. At the weekly market, you find local people, including tribals and non-tribals, as well as outsiders, mainly Hindu traders of various castes. Forest officials also come to the market to conduct business with Adivasis who work for the forest department. And the market attracts a variety of specialists selling their goods and services. The major goods that are exchanged in the market are manufactured goods, non local foods, local food and agricultural produce and manufactured items, and forest produce. The forest produce that is brought by the Asivasis is purchased by traders who carry it to towns. In the market, the buyers are mostly Adivasis, while the sellers are mainly caste Hindus. Adivasis earn cash from the sale of forest and agricultural produce and from wage labor, and they spend in the market mainly on low value trinkets and jewelry and consumption items such as manufactured cloth. According to Alfred Gell, the anthropologist who studied Dhorai, the market has significance much beyond its economic functions. For example, the layout of the market symbolizes the hierarchical intergroup social relations in this region. Different social groups are located according to their position in the caste and social hierarchy as well as in the market system. The wealthy and high ranking Rajput jeweler and the middle ranking local Hindu trader sit in the central zones, and the tribal sellers of vegetables and local wares in the outer circles. The quality of social relation is expressed in the kind of goods that are brought and sold, and the way in which transactions are carried out. For instance, interactions between tribal and non tribal traders are very different than those between Hindus of the same community. They express hierarchy and social distance rather than social equality. Caste based market and trading networks in pre colonial and colonial India. In some traditional accounts of Indian economic history, India's economy and society are seen as unchanging. Economic transformation was thought to have begun only in the advent of colonialism. It was assumed that India consisted of ancient village communities that were relatively self sufficient, and their economies were organized primarily on the basis of non market exchange. Under colonialism and in the early post independence period, the penetration of the commercial money economy into local agrarian economies and their incorporation into wider networks of exchange was thought to have brought about radical social and economic changes in rural and urban society. While colonialism certainly brought about major economic transformations, for example, due to demand that land revenue be paid in cash, recent historical research has shown that much of India's economy was already extensively monetized. In the late pre colonial period, and while various kinds of non market exchange systems, such as the Jajmani system, did exist in many villages and regions, even during the pre colonial period, villages were incorporated into wider networks of exchange through which agricultural products and goods circulated. It now seems that the sharp line that was often drawn between traditional and modern economy is actually rather fuzzy. Recent historical research has also highlighted the extensive and sophisticated trading networks that existed in pre colonial India. Of course, we know that for centuries India was a major manufacturer and exporter of handloom cloth, as well as source of many other goods that were in great demand in the global market, especially in Europe. So it is not surprising that pre-colonial India had well-organized manufacturing centers as well as indigenous merchant groups, trading networks and banking systems that enabled trade to take place within India and between India and the rest of the world. These traditional trading communities or castes had their own systems of banking and credit. For instance, an important instrument of exchange and credit was the hundi, a bill of exchange, which allowed merchants to engage in long distance trade. Because trade took place primarily within the caste and kinship network of these communities, a merchant in one part of the country could issue a hundi that would be honored by a merchant in another place. The Nattukotai Chettiars of Tamil Nadu provide an interesting illustration how these indigenous trading networks were organized and worked. A study of this community during the colonial period shows how its banking and trade activities were deeply embedded in the social organization of the community. The structures of caste, kinship, and family were oriented towards commercial activity and business activity was carried out within these social structures. As in most traditional merchant communities, Nagarattar banks were basically joint family firms, so that the structure of the business firm was the same as that of the family. Similarly, trading and banking activities were organized through caste and kinship relationship. For instance, their extensive caste-based social networks allowed Chettiar merchants to expand their activities into Southeast Asia and Ceylon. In one view, the economic activities of Nagarattars represented a kind of indigenous capitalism. This interpretation raises the question of whether there are or were forms of capitalism apart from those that arose in Europe. Social organizations of market traditional business communities. Many sociological studies of Indian economy have focused on traditional merchant communities or caste such as Nagarattars. As you have already learned, there is a close connection between the caste system and the economy in terms of land holding, occupational differentiation, and so on. This is also true in case of trade and markets. In fact, Vaishyas constitute one of the four varnas, an indication of importance of the merchant and of other business in Indian society since ancient time. However, like other varnas, Vaishya is often a status that is claimed or aspired to rather than a fixed identity or social status. Although there are Vaishya community whose traditional occupation has been trade or commerce for a long time, there are some caste groups that have entered into trade. Such groups tend to acquire or claim Vaishya status in the process of upward mobility. Like the history of all caste communities, in most cases there is a complex relationship between caste status or identity and caste practices, including occupation. The traditional business communities in India also include not only Vaishyas but also other groups with distinctive religious or other community identities such as Parsis, Sindhis, or other Jains. Merchant communities did not always have a high status in society. For instance, during the colonial period, the long distance trade in salt was controlled by a marginalized tribal group, the Banjaras. In each case, the particular nature of community, institutions, and ethos give rise to different organization and practice of business. To understand the operation of markets in India, both in earlier periods and at present, we can examine how specific arenas of business are controlled by particular communities. One of the reasons for this caste based specialization is that trade and commerce often separate through caste and kinship networks, as we seen in the case of Nagarattars, because businessmen are more likely to trust others of their own community or kin group. They tend to do business within such network rather than with others outside, and this tends to create a caste monopoly within certain areas of business. Colonialism and the emergence of new markets. The advent of colonialism in India produced major upheavals in the economy, causing disruptions in production, trade, and agriculture. A well known example in the demise of the handloom industry due to flooding of market with cheap manufactured textiles from England. Although pre-colonial India had a complex monetized economy, most historians consider the colonial period to be the turning point. In the colonial era, India began to be more fully linked to the world capitalist economy. Before being colonialized by the British, India was a major supplier of manufactured goods to the world market. After colonization, she became a source of raw material and agricultural products and a consumer of manufactured goods, both largely for benefit of industrializing England. At the same time, new groups entered into trade and business, sometimes in alliance with existing merchant communities and in some cases by forcing them out. But rather than completely overturning existing economic institutions, the expansion of the market economy in India provided new opportunities to some merchant communities which were able to improve their position by reorienting themselves to changing economic circumstances. In some cases, new communities emerged to take advantage of the economic opportunities provided by colonialism and continued to hold economic power even after independence. A good example of this process is provided by Marwadis, probably the most widespread and best known business community in India, represented by leading industrial families such as the Birlas. The community also includes shopkeepers and small traders in the bazaars of town throughout the country. The Marwadis became a successful business community only during the colonial period, when they took advantage of new opportunities in colonial cities such as Calcutta throughout the country to carry out trade and money lending. Like the Nagaratars, the success of Marwadis rested on their extensive social network, which created the relations of trust necessary to operate their banking system. Many Marwadi families accumulated enough wealth to become many lenders, and by acting as bankers, also helped commercial expansion of British in India. In the late colonial period and after independence, some Marwari families transformed themselves into modern industrialists, and even today Marwaris control more of the Indian industries than any other community. The story of emergence of a new business community under colonialism and its transformation from small migrant traders to merchant bankers to industrialists illustrate the importance of social context to economic processes. Understanding capitalism as a social system. Of the founders of modern sociology, Karl Marx was also a critic of modern capitalism. Marx understood capitalism as a system of commodity production or production for the market through use of wage labor. As you have already learned, Marx wrote that all economic systems are also social systems. Each mode of production consists of particular relations of production, which in turn give rise to a specific class structure. He emphasized that the economy does not consist of things but is made up of relations between people who are connected to one another through the process of production. Under the capitalist mode of production, labor itself becomes a commodity because workers must sell their labor power in the market to earn a wage. This gives rise to two basic classes: capitalists, who own the means of production, and workers who sell their labor to the capitalist. The capitalist class is able to profit from this system by paying the workers less than the value of what they actually produce, and so extracting surplus value from their labor. Marx's theory of capitalist economy and society provided the inspiration for numerous theories and debates about the nature of capitalism throughout the 19th and 20th century. Commoditization and consumption. The growth of capitalism around the world has meant the extension of markets into places and spheres of life that were previously untouched by the system. Commodification occurs when things that were earlier not traded in the market become commodities. For instance, labor or skills become things that can be bought and sold. According to Marx and other critics of capitalism, the process of commodification has negative social effects. The commodification of labor is one example, but there are many other examples in contemporary society. For instance, there is a controversy about the sale of kidneys by poor to cater to rich patients who need kidney transplants. According to many people, human organs should not become commodities. In earlier times, human beings themselves were bought and sold as slaves. But today it is considered immoral to treat people as commodities. But in modern society, almost everyone accepts the idea that a person's labor can be bought, or that the other services or skills can be provided in exchange for money. This is a situation that is found only in capitalist society according to Marx. In contemporary India, we can observe that things or processes that earlier were not part of market exchange become commodified. For example, traditionally, marriages were arranged by families, but now there are professional marriage bureaus and websites that help people to find brides and grooms for a fee. Another example are the many private institutes that offer personality development, spoken English, and so on, that students are taught the cultural and social skills required to succeed in the contemporary world. In earlier times, social skills such as good manners and etiquettes were imparted through the family, or we could think of the burgeoning of privately owned schools and colleges and coaching classes as a process of commodification of education. Another important feature of capitalist society is that consumption becomes more and more important, not just for economic reasons, but because it has symbolic meaning. In modern societies, consumption is an important way in which social distinctions are created and communicated. The consumer conveys a message about his or her socioeconomic status or cultural preferences by buying and displaying certain goods, and companies try to sell their goods by appealing to symbols of status or culture. Think of the advertisement that we see every day on television or on roadside hoardings and the meanings that advertisers try to attach to consumer goods in order to sell them. One of the Sociology's founder, Max Weber, was among the first to point out that the goods that people buy and use are closely related to their status in society. He coined the term status symbol to describe their relationship. For example, among the middle class in India today, the brand of cell phone or the model of car that one owns are important markers of socioeconomic status. Weber also wrote about how classes and status groups are differentiated on the basis of their lifestyles. Consumption is one aspect of lifestyle, but it also includes the way you decorate your home and the way you dress, your leisure activities, and many other aspects of daily life. Sociologists study consumption patterns and lifestyle because of their cultural and social significance in modern life. Globalization, interlinking of local, regional, national, and international markets. Since the late 1980s, India has entered a new era in its economic history, following the change in economic policy from one of the state-led development to liberalization. This shift also ushered in the era of globalization, a period in which the world is becoming increasingly interconnected, not only economically but also culturally and politically. The term globalization includes a number of trends, especially an increase in international movement of commodities, money, information, and people, as well as the development of technology, such as in computers, telecommunication, and transport, and other infrastructure to allow this movement. A central feature of globalization is the increasing extension and integration of markets around the world. This integration means that changes in a market in one part of the globe may have profound impact somewhere else far away. For instance, India's booming software industry may face a slump if the US economy does badly, leading to loss of business and jobs here. The software service centers and business process outsourcing industries are some of the major avenues through which India is getting connected to global economy. Companies based in India provide low-cost services and labor to customers located in the developed countries of the West. We can say there is now a global market for Indian software, labor, and other services. The virtual market conquering time and space. Under globalization, not only money and goods, but also people, cultural products, and images circulate rapidly around the world, enter new circuits of exchange, and create new markets, products, services, or elements of culture that were earlier outside of the market system are drawn into it. An example of the marketing of Indian spirituality and knowledge systems in the West. The growing market for international tourism also suggests how culture itself may become a commodity. An example is the famous annual fair in Pushkar, Rajasthan, to which pastoralists and traders come to the distant places to buy and sell camels and other livestock. While the Pushkar fair continues to be a major social and economic event for local people, it is also marketed internationally as a major tourist attraction. The fair is all more attractive to tourists because it comes just before a major Hindu religious festival of Kartik Purnima, when pilgrims came to bathe in the holy Pushkar lake. Thus, Hindu pilgrims, camel traders, and foreign tourists mingle at this event, exchanging not only livestock and money but also cultural symbols and religious merit. Debate on liberalization, market versus state. The globalization of the Indian economy has been primarily due to the policy of liberalization that was stated in the 1980s. Liberalization includes a range of policies such as privatization of public sector enterprises, loosening of government regulation of capital, labor and trade, a reduction in tariffs and import duties so that foreign goods can be imported more easily, and allowing easier access for foreign companies to set up industries in India. Another word for such change is marketization, or use of markets or market based processes to solve social, political, and economic problems. These include relaxation or removal of economic controls, privatization of industries, and removing government controls over wages and prices. Those who advocate marketization believe that these steps will promote economic growth and prosperity because private industry is more efficient than government owned industry. The changes that have been made under liberalization program have stimulated economic growth and opened up Indian markets to foreign companies. For example, many foreign branded goods are now sold which were not previously available. Increasing foreign investment is supposed to help economic growth and employment. The privatization companies is supposed to increase their efficiency and reduce government's burden on running these companies. However, impact of liberalization had been mixed. Many people argue that liberalization and globalization have had or will have a negative set impact on India. That is, the cost of and disadvantages will be more than the advantages and benefits. Some sectors of Indian industry, like software and IT or agriculture, may benefit from access to a global market, but other sectors like automobiles, electronics, or oil seeds will lose because they cannot compete with foreign producers. For example, Indian farmers are now exposed to competition from farmers in other countries because import of agricultural products is allowed. Earlier, Indian agriculture was protected from the world market by support prices and subsidies. Support prices help to ensure a minimum income for farmers because they are prices at which government agrees to buy agricultural commodities. Subsidies lower the cost of farming because the government pays the part of the price charge for inputs. Liberalization is against this kind of government interference in markets, so support prices and subsidies are reduced or withdrawn. This means that many farmers are not able to make a decent living from agriculture. Similarly, small manufacturers have been exposed to global competition as foreign goods and brands have entered the market, and some have not been able to compete. The privatization or closing of public sector industries has led to loss of employment in some sectors and to growth of unorganized sector employment at expense of organized sector. This is not good worker because organized sector generally offers better paid and more regular or permanent jobs. In this chapter, we have seen that there are many kinds of markets in contemporary India, from village heart to virtual stock exchange. These markets are dense social institutions and are connected to the other aspects of social culture, such as caste and class, in various ways. In addition, we have learned that exchange has a social and symbolic significance that goes far beyond its immediate economic purpose. Moreover, the ways in which goods and services are exchanged or circulate is rapidly changing due to liberalization of Indian economy and globalization. There are many ways and levels at which goods, services, cultural symbols, money, and so on circulate, from the local market in a village or town right up to a global important trading network such as Nasdaq. In today's rapidly changing world, it is important to understand how markets are being constantly transformed and the broader social and economic consequences of these changes.